Besides validating props, we can also validate events that we declare by using define_emits macro. So firstly, let's discuss what it means to validate event. In this case, event validation means to check if the data that is sent along with this event to the parent component is actually the data that we expect, meaning that it has a correct data type as well as correct shape. So to specify a validator for an event, we also have to use object notation in here. The keys in this object will correspond to event names, and values of these keys will point to validator functions. Earlier, we already defined one validation function called isPageValid, and this validator checks if page name is valid. If we take a look at the implementation of this function isPageValid inside of validators.js file, and put here arbitrary console log statement, for example, to print out the value of the page variable. And now, if inside of the now component we're going to emit event with name navigate, and as a payload specify invalid page name instead of this page variable right here, then that validator function isPageValid should kick in, print out that page name and validate it. And it is going to check if the passed page name is valid by using navItems object, which, as we see, stores valid page names as keys. So if in the browser we're going to fire that navigate event by navigating to the different page, instantly we're going to see in the console a couple of warnings. First warning says that event with the name navigate didn't pass validation, and another warning is related to failed probe validation with the name current page. Because if we pass invalid page name with the event navigate, then that invalid page name will be passed further to the component the now inside of current page prop, and which is why we see two warnings in console. So let's go back to the editor and revert changes that we did to the now component, and also remove that console log statement inside of isPageValid function, because we already made sure that our event validation for event navigate works as expected. And now we're going to apply the same validation but in a couple of other components, the logo and the header progress. Because currently in our application, if we click on either of those components, we should be redirected to the corresponding page. So those components also emit event with the name navigate, and we can apply validation for that event in the same way. Let's go ahead and do that. Firstly, let's open up component the header. For now, we're listening for click event on the logo component. And when this event happens, we're firing another event with the name goToTimeline. And almost the same thing happens when we click on the header progress component. But in this case, we fire a different event, goToProgress. But in fact, both of these events should be handled in a similar way in the app component. So instead of using two different events, we can reuse one event, just like we did in the now component. Let's copy over this define_emits macro from here, paste it to the header component. Previous usage of the define_emits macro can be removed. And now let's copy over import of the validation function isPageValid and also move it to the header component. And now instead of firing two different events whenever we click on the logo or on progress label, we can use the same event navigate just like we did inside of the now component. In the first case, as a page name, we should specify page name of timeline page, which is stored within page timeline constant. And in a second case, we're gonna pass a different constant, which stores name of the progress page, constant page progress. And now both of these constants should be imported in this component. Let's write down import for those constants. And since we changed event name which is fired from within the header component, we should also accept this event from the app component. That means we have to go back to the app component. Here we remove alt event listeners for goToTimeline and goToProgress events, since both of those events do not exist anymore. And instead of this, we're gonna listen to only one event with the name navigate. Let's take a listener registration from the now component, place it on top of the header component right here, and this listener, which is goTo function, will take care about everything for us. It is going to modify value of the reactive current page variable, which will trigger re-rendering of this part of template where that current page variable is used. And this way we're gonna be redirected to the desired page. And now let's take a closer look at one more thing. That logic that we have extracted into this isPageValid function also exists in another place, inside of normalizePageHash function. So this if condition right here pretty much runs the same logic, which we have extracted into isPageValid function. It is just written in here in a little bit different form. So to avoid code duplication, we can easily reuse isPageValid function. In this condition, let's replace everything in here and call function isPageValid, passing page name, which is stored inside of hash constant. But probably page name will be more appropriate name in this case, so let's rename that constant on page. And now we can also see that two constants after our current refactoring are no longer used in this file. Let's remove import of both, and instead copy over import of isPageValid function and move it to functions.js. Another thing that we're going to improve right now is related to so-called magic constants. For example, inside of the function isTimelineItemValid we can see that here we currently hardcode number 0, but this number doesn't really mean anything. And by looking at this function, we cannot understand what this number 0 really represents. The same number is also used inside of generateTimelineItems function. So it will be good to give this number a name. And we're going to create constant and call it midnight hour, since that number represents first hour of the day. Later we're gonna define this constant inside of our constants.js module, but for now, let's import that constant first and place all these constants that we import on one line. And let's go ahead and do the same inside of validators.js function. We'll replace number 0 with constant midnight hour. And above, let's add this constant name to the import statement. And finally, we're gonna have to declare this constant in constants module. Let's switch over to this module, export new constant with the name midnight hour and the value 0. And we're done. Finally, let's check that our application still works as expected. Let's click around a little bit and try to navigate between different pages. As we can see, we get desired behavior, so everything still works.